Thanks, Prof. We'll move quickly. You've raised important issues, so I'm not going to summarize. I think the main issue may relate to Africa's relationship with the rest of the world. And not starting the conversation or the debate, we recall what Samir Amin has always been arguing, that actually Africa, part of the challenge is that we may be too integrated to the rest of the world, or with the rest of the world, and incorrectly integrated, and that may be part of the problem. The China question always arises, and there are many debates around that, the role of China in Africa's development. Prof Yash Tandon, you are next, and just to say very briefly, Prof Yash Tandon is former executive director of the South SADA and the founding director of the Southern and Eastern African Trade Information Negotiations Institute. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much. The topic that was given to me was problematizing neoliberal growth narrative. Paul Zeleza has already done the work for me. Thank you, Paul. I can now go straight to the conclusions, which I'll take 10 minutes to present. I take NEPAD as an instrument as a window to look into the neoliberal strategy. This NEPAD, the new economic partnership for African development, is the emblematic document for neoliberal strategy. I'll go back to go to my conclusions, because my paper is written, you read it. I have only one recommendation, just one. Namely, that the Thabo Mbeki Foundation and the Institute might consider setting up a strategic working group to look into an alternative strategy. That NEPAD should become NEPAD, should become NEPPAD, not New Economic Partnership for Africa's development, but New Economic Partnership with the people for Africa's development. People were never consulted when NEPAD was created. Academics were never consulted. The Bamako Declaration of nearly 300 civil society organizations and academics that came out immediately after NEPAD came into being, criticized NEPAD for what it was doing, non-consultatively, undemocratically. So NEPAD should be replaced by NEPPA. In looking at that, I would suggest that this strategic working group that I am proposing should go back to the Lagos Plan of Action and the Abuja Treaty. How many of you know that? 4 hands, 5 hands only. Lagos Plan of Action of 1979, a generation ago, had laid out a strategy for Africa to create an economic integrated African economy by the year 2000. 2000 are gone, 14 years ago. And the Lagos Plan of Action had basically talked about the fact that Africa's underdevelopment was an outcome of the policies of structural adjustment program. 1979, already the SAP was identified as the culprit for Africa's underdevelopment. 1980, a year later, the World Bank came in with the Berg. How many of you know Berg report? At least the economists know. The Berg report, World Bank said, oh, Africa, don't panic. Why are you panicking? We'll bring you aid, we'll bring you investment. You will have your growth. And what happened? Lagos plan of action was thrown away and put in the waste paper basket. You think Africans who worked in the Economic Commission for Africa did not have analytical ability to understand what was happening to Africa? Why then did the political leadership of Africa then go to the World Bank and the IMF and so on to get their strategic advice when they had Economic Commission for Africa doing the job for them? How do you explain that? Leadership crisis. And that leadership crisis continues to this day as I speak here. I'll come to that in a minute, in my conclusions. The first thing that NEPA, this working group that I'm looking at, well, by the way, after the Berg report was adopted by our governments, there was the Abuja Treaty that also said that we, and I'm quoting from that, Abuja said, we must have self-reliance based on a new international economic order, Abuja Treaty. That too was put in the dustbin. For 30 years, African countries have been following anti-African development strategies. They have been following strategies for the developed countries, the empire. I'd like to reminisce a little bit because this morning's session was about reminiscing. A little footnote. In 1975, 73 onwards, I was teaching at Dar es Salaam University. And Patricia, my friend, is laughing because she was my colleague there. In 1975, 76, for about 6 months, Ruth First taught a course with me called East African Society and Environment. And Ruth and I used to do a lot of conversation, and Joe Slovo used to join us sometimes. My problem with, not so much with Ruth, but with Joe, was that I was telling him my view. Joe, you don't understand what is capital. Can you believe it? Me telling the commander of the army of, you don't understand capital. And my feeling to this day, 30 years down the road, is that the Communist Party of South Africa have not understood, in my view, what is capital. I wrote a little thing during those debates. It was called the Dar es Salaam debates, in which I had an essay called, Whose Capital, Whose State? And Patricia already talked about the neo-colonial state. That capital to this day belongs to global capital. They rule. You go to Johannesburg, Old Mutual owns most of the buildings. You step out, you go there, look at the banks, they're owned by the global capital. You step out to Johannesburg, look at the mining, and these are not owned by South Africans at all. The black economic empowerment tried, I think it's a bold move, but it did not succeed, in my view, because those who got into it got sucked up into global capital. There's a book that came out by Mbeki and Mbeki called Architects of Poverty. I don't know how many of you have read it. Some of you have. And Mbeki argued that BEE became a venue for an emerging black business elite to siphon off savings and to enrich themselves in collaboration with global capital. I agree with his thesis, but you may have your own views about that. But I'm suggesting that if this commission, that working group that I'm suggesting be created by the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, one of the things that I suggest they must look into is the nature of capital in South Africa. And the point that I was arguing with Joe many years ago was, Joe, you will never be able to nationalize this capital because your struggle was for national independence for the time being, as Nkrumah was talking about, get to political independence. But the struggle for economic independence is another struggle. That is war. I must say I won that battle practically because there was no nationalization. South African government could not nationalize that capital. That's global capital, for heaven's sake. Anyway, I will not reminisce too much. I get carried away sometimes with passion. So, this particular group that I am suggesting look into alternative strategy should go back to Abuja and Lagos Plan of Action. 2, no open door for aid or for foreign direct investments. Yes, I would agree that our diaspora would bring it, provided they are able to put their money into investments that we need. Because FDIs, I have done a lot of research into that, are they simply to appropriate our resources? They are not here to develop us, but to develop them. So no open door. And if there is foreign investments coming, it should be on a consensual basis. In other words, the government should have consultations with various stakeholders, and that would include private domestic capital, not foreign capital, farm workers, farmers, farm workers, civil society. Let them discuss on what basis they should come. For example, there is no reason why FDI should have access to our savings. Why? They come and appropriate our savings, and then that becomes part of their investment, and they may externalize profits out of that. Why? Wrong strategy. Remember, I'm on my conclusion, still. I think this commission, this body that I'm hoping that foundation might set up, should look into the global crisis, financial crisis. It's not only, you have mentioned that already. That crisis deepening, fictitious capital has taken over productive capital. What Mugabe used to do in Zimbabwe, printing money, and they used to criticize Mugabe for that, rightly, is what they are doing now in America, in Britain. You know what they call it? Quantitative easing. How many of you heard of that? Quantitative easing, QEs. Hey, they invented a technical term called quantitative easing, and the masses don't understand. They think, wow, this is a sophisticated strategy, QE. These ruling classes in the empire are fooling their own people. And they are printing money to do what? To balance the books of the banks. Between 2007 and now, the banks have simply been lending money without collaterals for housing bubbles that you know, housing. I won't go into technical details, but this commission should look into that. And what we are witnessing is erosion of productive investments, even in the Western countries, fictitious capital taking over. I live in England now, and I noticed that the government is whittling away, is eroding social services for the poor people, for middle class people, for aged people, in order that the savings should then go to where? Banks. And the banks are not even on lending for investment purposes. There's a major crisis in England that I live in. There's a major crisis in Europe. And that brings me to the next point that this commission I'm asking should look into. Geopolitical situation. Between 1985 or so and 9/11, beginning of the century, economics dominated. Economism was the language of conversation. You know what's the language today? Securitization. Not economics, military securitization. We now live, please, this commission should look into it, we now live in World War IV. Now some people ask me, what happened to World War III? Well, I always argue that the Cold War was cold for the United Soviet Union and NATO countries. It was hot for us. It was hot for us in Vietnam, hot for us in South Africa, hot for us in Mozambique. That was World War III against us. And what we are facing now is World War IV. And this working group should look into that because I'm serious about that. I can't go into details, my paper has something about that. And one of the aspects of World War IV is resource war. Africa has some of the most strategic elements. They're not just looking for markets. No, China is looking for markets, that's true, and so on. But that's an important issue you raise, Paul. But the bigger issue of securitization, because there are strategic minerals that we have, and China has too, which these people don't have. How else do you explain Mali and Central African Republic? That's the issue. Resource war. There are many other manifestations for as well. Is information war. Now, for example, there is nothing that you can send over the email that the Americans don't know. From now on, I communicate with my friends through letters. Postal letters are the best. So we are in a World War IV. This thing that's happening in Ukraine is not, it's just the beginning. It's just the beginning. Putin is very smart, I must say. Very smart. He says, you sanction me, okay, you sanction me, okay, and then I won't sell you our oil. I'll go to China, I'll go to Iran, and so on. It's a war. But that war is only the beginning, because the bigger war is going to be in Southeast Asian Sea, in the China Sea. And the amount of money that the Western countries are spending on armaments and space race, and Antarctica race, is enormous. Because that's the war coming now. Big war. And you know what's happening in Africa? We are not even conscious of that. Because Africa is going to be the proxy ground for their wars. So although I'm an economist myself, I think at this point in time we have to look at geopolitics in command. My final, well, I'll sit down quickly, I'm still talking conclusions. Final submission, that this commission should look into what our first generation leadership achieved. The Nkrumah, the Nyeres, the Obotes, the Kaundas, the Sankaras, these people knew what Nkrumah said, political kingdom first, yes, but economic liberation is a long way to struggle. he was removed. Lumumba was removed. Obote, my president, I'm from Uganda, was removed by the coup d'etat. British and the Israelis plotted to remove Obote from power. And that's evidence now in the archives. Kaunda. Here I should say that this Thabo Mbeki Foundation, if they accept my recommendation, should join hands with Uongozi Institute for African Leadership in Dar es Salaam. I was there in August, invited by former President Thabo Nkapa. Thabo Mbeki was also, President Thabo Mbeki was also there, and so on. We had a very good debate, and I think it'll be important for the Thabo Mbeki Foundation here to link with Uongozi in order that we have a different vision for the future. We may have eyesight, but we don't have visions. And that's what's needed. Thank you very much.